where things stand. A little bit of geographic diversity. Idaho, out sort of in the Mountain West, Michigan, Midwest, Mississippi down south with Missouri, North Dakota in the plains, and Washington out west as well. You can see the delegate breakdown there. Which state are you looking at, Podcool? Which ones are sort of catching your fancy for tomorrow night?
Yeah, I think there's kind of a bit. I think to update what we had said sort of last time around, I think definitely Michigan continues to be a race that everybody's watching. Um, Mostly just because of how Sanders performed there in 2016. And I also think Washington is going to be a state that a lot of people are paying attention to pretty closely, only because I think the conventional wisdom is that Washington should be an easy win for Sanders. But it looks like some of the recent polling to come out of the state has Biden ahead. The one, I guess, hiccup in Washington is it's a vote by mail state, and so it's a little bit unclear who maybe voted earlier in the process to those voting later. On Super Tuesday, we saw a bit of a relationship between the early state, between whether or not there was a long early state voting period and how Biden was doing, because there were a lot of people who had voted early and voted for Mayor Pete or Amy Klobuchar, who then later dropped out even before Election Day. So kind of curious to see how that dynamic might play out in Washington State. But yeah, I think to answer your question, I think Michigan and Washington State are going to be two of the main races we're going to be watching pretty closely, especially as there have been a few Michigan polls, not many, but last time around, the Michigan polls had Hillary ahead, and then Bernie ended up doing pretty well on Election Day. So we'll kind of see how that turns out come Election night.
Yeah, and I want to talk about those in a second. I just want to run through a couple of these. You see, obviously, Michigan's the big prize, followed by Washington. But the challenge for Sanders is, Mississippi, Missouri are pretty big states if you add them up, and those are states I think everyone expects Biden to do very well in, based on his performance on Super Tuesday and the demographics of those states and how they match up. But I want to go to the next slide that we have here. I want to be a little careful about it. Put together. This is last year's version of these states. Now they didn't happen in the same order. They didn't happen on the same day, so it's not entirely an apples and apples kind of situation. But just to give you a sense of sort of how people did, to the extent you want to use Hillary and Biden as somewhat interchangeable, and obviously Bernie Sanders being the the stagnant element here. But give you a sense of how everybody talks about Michigan, and yes, Bernie Sanders did pull up an upset there. There was a bit of a polling error, but I think people should realize is it wasn't a really big win. He won by like 1.4% or something, and he wound up netting 4 delegates over Hillary. That's what's on that right hand column there, to get a sense of where these things come from. So even if you say, well, Sanders could win it, margins matter at this point. And with the way that the delegate math works in the Democratic primary system, he really, you look at it, his big haul last time really was in Washington, where he netted 47 delegates out of that. If it's much closer, or if somehow Biden pulls out a win, there just aren't a lot of big delegate hauls for Sanders looking at tomorrow. And conceivably, you could see, I think, and I like your thoughts on this, in the states like Mississippi and Missouri, Biden might be better situated to pull out a bigger win. Missouri was very close last time. I think that was within 2 or 3 points as well. But Biden has seemed to have done better um, versus Sanders' performance versus Hillary last time.
Yeah, I agree. I think Missouri is also going to be a state that we're going to watch just to sort of see how maybe well Biden could do. At least that's how some of the polling seems to indicate that it will be a Biden win, but it could be a question of how much, which that's going to directly impact or directly influence the delegate allocation at that point. But on the map that's on the screen right now, it's another thing worth noting, which I think will affect kind of the outcomes of the race are in Idaho. 4 years ago, it was a caucus, and so those rules in 2016, when there were caucuses, that tended to benefit Bernie a little bit better, just due to activist support and having more ideologically inclined voters willing to kind of stay at the caucus for a long time. And so this time around, Idaho is going to be a primary. And so I don't know if Bernie could expect to do well in that state as he did 4 years ago. And so there's also, in addition to just the overall tides of everything else going against him, that also some of these rules changes from 2016 to 2020 might also not be benefiting him as we shift from that contest to this one.
And as a good point, we should note also, just the way a preview for tomorrow and watching it, North Dakota is technically a caucus state, but it's actually what's known as a firehouse caucus. It's sort of a primary run by the party. It's not like when you think of Iowa or Nevada, where you have to go and there's alignments and then there's realignments and there's state delegate equivalents. It's none of that. It's basically there are 16 polling locations in the entire state, and that out from the North Dakota Dems. But they are also encouraging people to mail in ballots. So it will be much more straightforward, but it is a party-run event. They're saying they may not have results until Wednesday. So unlike other states where we were able to collect on Super Tuesday and be the fastest in almost all of the states, if not actually all the states, in terms of collecting votes, we are once again at the mercy of the state Democratic Party to provide us those results. So if you don't see things coming in, if you're a Bernie Sanders fan, you want to see how he's doing in a state where he should do well, you may not see that tomorrow. And again, that's simply because we have to wait for the state party to provide those results.